It's an honor to have been asked to come and talk to you a little about, my view of what it means to be moving into and be in the midst of a lot of change around our thinking around literacy. And I'm sure that we all see it with our students, or our children, or people around us. And it seems like the change is coming fast and furious a lot of times. It's hard to make sense of it all. And I'm not going to say that I have the answers either. But I will try to kind of frame the idea of thinking of the literacies in the lives of our students, not just inside school, but outside of school, and how to think about how we might try to value those kind of literacies. And in some ways, they're very different from traditional school-based literacies, which are still very important. So I'm going to try to talk us through a little bit. I'm thinking about digital literacies kind of through the frame of the Common Core, but not necessarily either. You'll see what I mean as we go through. But certainly we should be thinking in terms of how can we encourage our students to be expressing themselves, to be creative, to be analytical, to be critical thinking in their lives as well as in school. It also brings up the idea of there's a lot of distraction as well. And we probably all see this now in our classrooms. The weapons of mass distraction. And this is the kind of balance we need to find, which is I would argue that there's a lot of positive things around encouraging literacy with our students. Just as there's a lot of things that we're not sure, about what's going on either. And that unknown quality makes it really difficult for teachers and as parents to really make sense of it all as we're in the moment. Because we really are in this strange moment where things are changing very rapidly. And for us to try to make sense of it, it almost feels a little antiquated by the time we do make sense of it. And so, part of this is just trying to think through the possibilities, but also thinking how can we allow our students to be reflective on things that they're doing. This is a key part, I think, of our role as educators, is to give them the means, give them the guidance, give them the tools and the thinking time to really think through what they're doing when they're on Facebook, like my students are when they're 11 years old. How do we think about those also in terms of the literacies that are going on outside of school? And the things that our students are doing that maybe they don't see it through the lens of literacy, and maybe we don't either, but maybe we should. And be thinking about this idea of their ways that they connect with other people around the world, of even texting shorthand as a certain kind of language that they're developing, of the idea of embedding media into a piece of writing, and thinking about what that all means for them as learners and for us as teachers as well. So when I eavesdrop on my students, which I'm sure everyone does, I'm always curious what they're talking about. And these are some of the things that I noticed, particularly in the last year, which is gaming is a huge part of what they do. Particularly online multiplayer gaming systems where they're connecting with people around the world and with their friends in online, massive online gaming systems. And, it's not always a positive experience for them as well. I don't know how much their parents know what they're doing either. But they're often saying at the end of the day, we'll connect later on World of Warcraft, and we'll meet up. Of their experience, particularly with their interaction with their devices, mostly mobile devices, more than I would say the computer. But on the mobile devices, they are doing a lot of gaming. And what I want to suggest as we kind of go through is that what we want to do is shift it so that the students are not just the ones on the receiving end of the information, so that we can figure out ways to switch it around so they're the ones creating the content and not just being the ones reading it, experiencing it as somebody else has created. That our role as educators is to help them, I think through that role and making that switch so that they become the ones who have the agency, right? Because we want our students to have agency in the world. And even though the games are going to change, probably next week, even though the devices will probably change in 6 months, we still want them to have those skills that allows them to create things and be an active voice, a positive active voice in the world that they are moving into. A lot of them still text a lot, more than telephoning, right? And social networking, again, I talked about Facebook, but years ago, I can remember students talking about MySpace. It's still around, believe it or not. But that's how quickly things change, too. And they still, Facebook is still the big thing, I think, right now for our students. And there are a lot of, that's a whole other session, right? Let's get your hand. Around the possibilities and pitfalls of Facebook and social networking. They do a lot of video production because the phones and devices have put video cameras in their hands. Most of the ones, my students that do video production, they're the skateboarding kids. They do these huge amounts of skateboarding and scooter videos set to music. And they do all these weird angles, and it's funny to talk to them about where they learned how to do the video production. Of course, they don't see it that way. They're like, well, we just put a camera on the ground, But really, what it is they've watched. But when you dig in a little bit, what they've done is they've watched other videos on YouTube and learned from other kids or other experts, and that expertise kind of filters down. And so then they're kind of passing that on. You have this interesting thing where YouTube is a source for expertise in the world now. I was thinking earlier, because we were in a great workshop about digital storytelling, and the point I want to make, and then I forgot about it, was like any of the tools that they were sharing with us. I mean, you could learn that just by going on YouTube and finding a tutorial that somebody somewhere has made, and there's probably thousands of them. And that doesn't mean that we don't need days like this where we share our expertise with each other, but what it means is that the expertise is right at the fingertips of so many people, including our kids. And that is one of the major changes, I think, particularly around thinking of video. And we think of expository writing and informational text. I mean, YouTube is, along with the cat videos, the world of how to do things. And so I've had students who have done whole tutorials on how to play Minecraft. How to create characters in this game, how to go through this, and they post them on their own YouTube account, and they share them with their friends in the world, and think of what that means. There's a lot of positive to that, and then there's also things that could not be positive. So when I talk to my students about where does the cyberbullying happen for them, YouTube. Almost overwhelmingly now. The comments that people leave, and it's interesting to have discussions about them, what that means, because they realize that people are putting comments there just to start a debate or a flame war discussion on somebody's video. Like people are just coming around just to spark that kind of discussion. So we have to talk about how you monitor and do all those things with your videos. But it's kind of interesting. A lot of them are into music remixing now, of taking various songs and remixing it together. Oh, they don't worry about copyright. Don't worry about that. So that's part of our role too, is to teach them about copyright remixing and Creative Commons and all these terminology that weren't there 2 or 3 years ago, at least in our kind of common vernacular. But we can teach them about how to use music from places where artists have said it's okay to remix my song, and let them think about the ways that it's legal, and also that you're valuing people as artists as well. Fan fiction. I've had students, and they don't always come out and say it, so it's like one of these stealth conversations that go on. But I've had students who write fan fiction at fan fiction sites. By the way, I can't remember the number, but like the Harry Potter fan fiction, it's hundreds of thousands of people writing on a regular basis, taking offshoots of the Harry Potter characters and sending them off on their own adventures. And last year I had a student who was really into Japanese manga, graphic novels and stories. And she told me about the hundreds of stories that she had posted on the fan fiction site, and the feedback she was getting from that community, and how she was using it to revise her writing. And she didn't want to share it with any of her other students. Like, she didn't want me to tell anybody. I'm telling you this for sure. But really, so we had discussions about what that meant. And she was writing for her audience. I mean, that was a real, authentic piece of writing there. And I just thought it was really fascinating. She had found a way to tap into that, use her interest, and also extend herself as a writer in a space that fell way outside of school. And then, ebook reading is one of these things where, thinking of what this means to reading, which we're going to get into in a second, and how, ebooks more and more incorporate multimedia into that, and kind of what that means for our students as readers. All right, so I'm going to talk about reading for a little bit, and then I'm going to try to go through each of the domains as we kind of go through, just to kind of give an overview about some of the things that I've been thinking about. Reading online is really fascinating and frustrating. So if you ever look over the shoulder of a student or a young, I've done it with my sons too, watch them try to read an article online, it doesn't go from start to end, right? They are jumping all over the place, and you know what? I think we are too. This, I don't know if you can't see that well, but this is a diagram that shows some studies that have been done tracking the eye movements of people reading a website, okay? You can't see it so much, but what they call it is the F shape, not for fail either. what happens is that what we usually do is we start in the upper left corner because we're so trained to do that with regular text, and we read across, but we usually don't read all the way across. We're now starting to scan for main ideas, so we start going down the column and looking for keywords that might attract our attention. And as you're going down, you're not really paying attention to the individual words anymore. You're looking for media, you're looking for links, you're looking for main ideas. And this is what a lot of students do when we say, here, you should read this website, and now we get frustrated because they haven't got the idea that we want them to get. Part of it is because they probably haven't been reading the way we're thinking that they're reading, which is like a book. And people, when we read online, we don't read like books, even though we don't really always stop to think about what that means. So it's kind of fascinating if you look up for any of the studies they've been doing around eye movements, tracking eye movements as people watch and read websites. Also, the idea of not just hypertext, but links embedded in web pages, and how easy it is to click and then you never come back to the page that you started on. Instead, you're 5 pages down the road, and your path is completely, you've lost. Either you've lost your interest in the initial inquiry that you were doing, or you can't find your way back, right? And so this really affects how students are reading online as well, because they're not always going back to that anchor text. They've been moving down the line so far that it's hard to figure out why they were there in the first place, And so hyperlinks have a lot of potential. I'll talk about that in the writing part of it, but also have the potential for distraction as well. So these were some strategies that came out as I was doing some research around how to help students with this. And part of it is helping students think about their reading paths that they're doing when they're online. And there are a number of graphic organizers that will help students stay focused on kind of where they are and where they need to be. Also, synthesis is a big part of our standards now of thinking about how to teach them explicitly how to use multiple texts around the same topic and how to think about them in terms as part of a bigger picture idea. And also try to explicitly teach the scanning of the pages. So if I went back to that F shape, right, if you show that to students, they're fascinated by that. And then they start having some thinking about their own reading and what it means. And the next time they're on, actually, I've asked my students about this, they notice that they're paying attention to how they're reading in ways that they hadn't even thought of before. Just like when you go home, maybe next time you read an article online, just pay attention to what you're really reading and how far you get into the article and what you do when you reach a link or when you reach a video or an image embedded in it. And also understanding what's called the weight of a hyperlink. And what that means is how important is it for me to go from here to this next page, and how to figure out that importance. And it might be you have to go there first and then come back. It depends. And also navigating the path. And one way I have taught this is using, the make your own adventure stories, right? Where you get to a page that says, if you think Bob should jump off a cliff, go to page 3, and if you think he should have a parachute, go to page 5. Is we've used online spaces to create these kind of texts with hyperlinks within them, so that the kids have to map out a whole story with links and where they would go. And the reader, who's ever reading the story, makes the choices based on the hyperlinks that they connect. But the important thing is having students actually have to make a big conceptual map of all the choices that a reader might make. And therefore, as a writer, the choices you have to bring into the picture. And that helps them see this idea of how paths move from different texts and different websites together. All right, and then moving into writing a little bit. So, when we talk about agency of our students, this is where writing comes into the play. And writing has a whole lot of different elements to it now than it used to. Some of it are still the same kind of built out. A lot of times my students are not writing for me, they're writing for the world, depending on what project we're doing. And that shift in audience and potential of audience is really fascinating to watch, and particularly on thinking about the quality that they want to put into their writing when they know that it's going to be read by other kids and whatever kind of project we happen to be in, or their parents, if they're looking at our website, or whoever comes there. And also design plays a role into it too. We don't really think of design so much in writing, except when you think about how you construct a web page or a digital project. Design is a big part of it. Just think of all the write-up when Steve Jobs died, right, about his influence on how we look at technology. And that idea of what things look like and how you interact with them is a key part of literacy as we move into the future, I think. That, our students, when they have jobs and they're kind of making things, design is going to be part of what they need to know. And we don't teach it so much in school, I think, design elements. Maybe in art class, but then, kids see art classes over here, just like they see writing classes way over here. And we need to figure out ways to pull all those together. So this is from last year's National Day on Writing. This year's National Day on Writing is this coming Friday. It's actually 2 days. It's supposed to be October 20th, but they realized it was a Saturday, so they bumped it to the 19th as well. And last year the question that they asked teachers, parents, kids across the country is, tell us why you write. And so we did this as a writing prompt, and then they used, we have some iPods, and they did some podcasting around it to get their voice out into this national conversation that was going on around writing. And I was just blown away by some of the responses they did. Particularly, I have to say, the boys were talking about the feelings that they can get out with their writing. And it was really just fascinating to just ask that question. I honestly didn't know what I would get from them at that early point of the year because I didn't really know them as writers yet. This year's question is not why I write, but what do you write? And we asked some people actually at the beginning of the day here to try to answer that, because we'll try to add to our writing project people to the mix of conversation this year around thinking in terms of the things that you like to write. So I would encourage you maybe with your students this week, if you get a chance, even if it's a writing prompt or something, is try to think about asking that question. What do you like to write? And whether you take part in the national conversation on Friday and Saturday, you'll decide that, I think. But just think about the value of having a national conversation around writing. And it's sponsored by NCTE, and the Writing Project is one of the partners, as well as the New York Times. They do big features around writing around that. Actually, they do it all year. Their blog site at the Times is actually has a lot of great stuff around education and writing. So I would encourage you to be thinking about whether you can get your students into that conversation as well, just like we were doing that today here at the Writing Project. So that's related to speaking and listening, because notice how they were using their voice to get their message out into the world. And that idea of using podcasting in particular as a way to value the voice of our students and think in terms of the stories that they have to tell can be really powerful for a lot of students, depending on your student population. There have been some great examples of urban schools that, particularly a lot of immigrant families, ESL students who've been able to tell the story of their family in a way that they couldn't before, but they can do it with their voice and they can do it with digital storytelling in ways that really values their heritage, but also values the literacy skills that we want to be teaching them. This is just some examples. A lot of people are using This I Believe feature from NPR as a great tool for teaching students to do that kind of similar writing. And then using podcasting, and you can use the NPR files as your mentor text and get students to think about the things that they hold true for themselves. This is a voice thread, and actually if you join us, and I'll have it up in a little bit, at Smith Vocational in about 2 weeks, it'll be like a follow-up session to this where we're going to do some work around looking at what digital literacy is and playing around with some tools as well. And one of the resources we're going to use is related to a resource put up on the National Writing Project's Digital Is website. And it has to do with change agents of helping students express their opinion around making change in the world. This is a voice thread that an elementary school had done looking at the Japanese internment camps. And they did a lot of research, and then they were writing letters in the voice of families that went through the internment. And then they published it online, and this one I looked the other day had over 70,000 visitors. So more than 70,000 people had visited and watched it. And actually, as you go through, tons of people have left comments, because you can comment on voice thread, on it after listening to the student work. So, authentic publishing, authentic voice, the writing is part of it, the research is part of it, and here you have this, really powerful piece of student work that shows a lot of potential around the tools that are out there for use. So if you want to learn more about this resource, and I'll date in a few seconds up there. This is the one that frustrates me and maybe you the most, of thinking about the grammar mechanics and what happens to student writing when they are using technology, and how easily they fall into their text speak when they're writing something formal. That you, I don't need to see that anymore, in my papers. And it has to do, though, with students not really understanding those lines between formal and informal writing, and what might be appropriate here maybe isn't appropriate there, but maybe some middle ground is over here, and how to make that students try to see the value of that. Because a lot of them don't see the value of the formal writing. They'd rather do the informal writing. We could say it's because it's easier for them, but also it's because that's how they're communicating in their head, thinking that everyone understands exactly what they're writing or saying. So it is very tricky, and so I was trying to think about, we're often in the middle ground here, trying to figure out, how to show them that some writing is formal writing. And if you're publishing something for the world on our internet site, on our website, that can be pretty formal writing sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. And so one of the things that I've tried to do over the years is try to give them practice, obviously in formal writing, but also give them space to do informal writing as well in class. And that allows them, and allows me, a chance to be able to talk to them about, okay, you did this writing prompt in text speak only, but let's say we were going to now convert this into a more formal piece of writing, what would you need to do? And that, doesn't help all the time. I still see the U's in my paper sometimes. But it allows them to at least consider this idea that different writing for different audiences for different reasons is part of what we're doing. And, the reason for texting shorthand is because, you had limited letters. It used to be limited number of, words that you could send. Mostly we're all unlimited now probably, but it used to be originally, right? And so that led to the real shorthand of text speak. And now it just is a natural part of the written vocabulary of a lot of our students. So I think trying to kind of formalize this and let them see the value of both, and us also see the value of both. Because there is value in that shorthand text speak. Maybe not for the research project you're doing, but maybe for other things there is. And so if we kind of bring that in and value it in a way that they see that we understand that might be helpful for them as well. So these are the things I just talked about, I guess. Okay? So establishing those opportunities for informal and formal writing. Okay, so here's the question as we kind of move towards the end of it is, so if you're thinking, well, that's a lot of information, where do I even kind of begin with that? One of the things I would suggest is that you're already part of the Writing Project Network because you're here, and we, utilize ourselves a lot as a community of teachers to think about these kind of things. I would also suggest that you consider, are there other spaces online that you might connect with other teachers? I know time is an issue, so you want to be wise about the places that you go. But there are vast communities of teachers who are just as passionate about you and your field of study or your, what you teach in your level, that if you can find ways to tap into that, your area of knowledge and connections and resources expands dramatically. And